Last summer, a CBS News team was here to film this sunrise. Other Western camera teams have entered China, but we were the first to stay so long in one place as important as Shanghai. Since we began this report, an attack on Western culture and ideas has begun again in China. For a moment, the curtain lifted. Even as this is being broadcast, it may be falling again. Today, nearly 11 million people wake up here, the biggest city and the biggest country in the world. China's has been the world's biggest revolution, one that never seems to end, one that many Western observers have tried to understand. We've tried too. 8 weeks of filming, months of editing. It's been 25 years since we could make a first-hand report. We are observers, and there are limits to what we can see and hear. First morning, when the light was good, we could see them, and they could see us. A crowd of 2,000 curious Chinese and we, suddenly realizing that the cultural barriers we have been trying to penetrate for 400 years still stand. You might think that once a revolution takes place, a country is transformed. A country, or a city, does not change that easily. The Chinese, after all, operate from traditions that go back 4,000 years. They cannot cast off the past completely, no more than we can. The past and present, the cultural conflicts, the changes, they all come together in Shanghai. What follows are notes and observations on the biggest changes that have ever happened to so many people in so short a time, in our words and theirs.
CBS Reports, Shanghai.
Are you getting burned by your present homeowner's insurance? Are your claims settled quickly with courteous personal service? Are you paying for the wrong coverage? You better find out. See your independent insurance agent. He's on your side. He'll select a policy from a number of insurance companies. That way you'll get just the protection you need at a fair cost. Get this free booklet from your professional independent insurance agent wherever you see this symbol.
A great salad begins here with lettuce fresh from the garden. A great salad dressing begins in the garden too. Great Beginnings salad dressing mix with its genuine cut glass cruet, its blend of aromatic herbs and tangy spices, brings out the greatness of your salad every time. Great Beginnings salad dressing mix. Try them all. Better than good, it's Great Beginnings.
CBS Reports, Shanghai continues with producer-reporter Irv Drasnin.
What you will see tonight could be any day in the life of Shanghai. 24 hours in the life of a city. 24 years in the life of a revolution. It was filmed in 2 months during the summer of 1973. That is the longest stay any American observer has been permitted in this city that was once dominated by foreigners. For anyone old enough to remember, Shanghai looks much the same as it did a quarter of a century ago. A generation has not changed the face of Shanghai as much as it has changed its soul. Shanghai's past reflects the glory not of the Chinese Empire, but of the British Empire. The Chinese would not have built a city this way. The history of modern Shanghai was written in the logs and ledgers of our great-grandfathers, Englishmen, Frenchmen, and Americans. What brought them here was a revolution of their making, the Industrial Revolution. China became part of an expanding world market and Shanghai its marketplace. The noble commodities were tea and silk. The ignoble commodity was opium. Our idea of foreign trade was to sell opium in exchange for the tea and the silk. It was a trade the Chinese neither wanted nor valued. We fought a war called the Opium War to open China to the world in 1842. It fulfilled the vision of an illiterate Italian merchant named Marco Polo. He had observed 700 years ago, there pass and repass on these waters a great number of vessels. and more wealth and merchandise than all the rivers and seas of Christendom put together. It seems more like a sea than a river. This is the way we came for 100 years, riding the winds and tides of the river, bringing soldiers and soldiers of fortune, merchants and missionaries, to Shanghai. The name itself fired the imagination, inspiring tales both romantic and sinister. Everyone knew what it meant to be Shanghaied. It also inspired dreams of adventure and wealth, which for some came true. Shanghai was the Paris of the Orient. This was its Champs-Élysées. Nanking Road is still its major commercial street. Not far away, the Americans built a street of their own and called it Broadway. The spirit of capitalism, not of socialist revolution, built this city and molded its character. Where there was money and power in 20th century China, it was in Shanghai. Where there was a bourgeoisie, a middle class, it was in Shanghai. Unlike any other place in China, you could make your fortune in Shanghai. Few foreigners ever looked beyond the Great Wall they had built into the narrow, winding streets of the other Shanghai, the Chinese city. Shanghai was rich. China was poor. This was part of China. It was an area, the tourist books once advised, that foreigners should not enter alone for fear of getting lost or robbed. This was the original walled city of Shanghai, whose origins have been traced to the state of Wu of the 6th century BC. It has been said that in a city, time becomes visible. Time has preserved many things in Shanghai. The solitary craftsman and the need for his craft remain in the abacus repair shop. In the center of the old Chinese city, there remains this tourist attraction of the past. It was known throughout the world as the willow pattern tea house, the pattern on thousands of pieces of china. What is visible here is a luxury few ordinary Chinese ever knew in the past, a day off. Even a 6-day work week provides new leisure. For older people, it means the unheard of benefits of retirement and a pension. The old China was a man's world. Today, the Chinese like to say, women occupy half the heaven and half the tea house. The Chinese know as the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Like every other relic of the past in China, what once was for the privileged, now is for the people. Now they can afford the few pennies and the time spent sipping tea. Talking, perhaps listening to their grandchildren sing. These are the Chinese who remember the past. The past is for sale now in Shanghai, on the back shelves of 2 small second-hand stores, for foreigners only. Once there were 60,000 foreigners living here. Today, there are only 2 of them, still permanently doing business. 2 civilizations met in Shanghai, the one inscrutable to the other. It is the spirit of the past that concerns China's leaders today. The relics are more easily disposed of. It is time to get rid of anything foreign or old that does not serve the new China. The chimes of the Customs House clock, made to sound like Big Ben, now play The East is Red. The park, once closed to Chinese, is closed now only for repairs. The British consulate, which once dominated the waterfront, now is a club for visiting seamen. The racetrack, once the center of Shanghai society, now is the People's Park. The American Community Church is now a gymnasium for the People's Army. The Customs House is still the Customs House, and Shanghai's greatness still depends on the trade that flows past its window. Once the Inspector General of Customs sat here, one of the most powerful officials in China, an Englishman. Today, China is in business for itself. For the first time, trade with the West is conducted between equals. In the past, no Chinese symbolized the plight of China more than the coolie. His cheap labor built Shanghai and did its work in the factories and foundries, in the mills, and on the docks. The coolie was anonymous. No family, no future, no name. This man's name is Sung Chi Chuen, 58 years old, a docker here since he was 21. You don't have to understand Marx or Lenin or the thought of Mao Zedong to understand Sung, the dock worker.
In the past, it was all manual labor, using bamboo poles on our backs. We had to carry as much as 300 or 400 pounds at a time, working as long as 13 or 14 hours a day. Take a look now. It's becoming more mechanized every day. That is the biggest change, from using our shoulders to using machinery. Another thing, workers now have uniforms, helmets, and leather shoes. In the past, we were called smelly coolies by the gang bosses. Once, right here at this dock, I was unloading a ship. It was cold, but in the toilet it was warmer. I went there to wrap my feet with a piece of burlap. A foreman saw me. You know what he did? He came over to question me and slapped me with the front and back of his hand and made my mouth bleed. I was young then. I wouldn't take that and try to reason with him. He called 2 guards to drag me down to the pier. There, a plainclothesman took me to the railing, where he handcuffed me. From 10 in the morning straight through to 2 the next morning, when I was let go. I was in such physical shape that I collapsed. In the old society, it was hopeless. It was dog eat dog.
There is now an entire generation of Chinese who never knew the past. This is a children's palace. It is an afternoon playground and training ground for specially selected students, ages 6 to 16. It was the mansion of a foreign industrialist. Then it was called the Marble Hall. In Shanghai, past and present come together in ways that are sometimes unexpected. The question is how much to use of the past without losing the essence of China or of the revolution. Nine-year-old Wu Mei Lu is practicing a passage from the contemporary Chinese ballet, The Red Detachment of Women. It is a revolutionary lesson, no matter how traditional it may appear. children are little red soldiers, so called because they are advanced students in skills and politics. They learn by imitating the long march of 40 years ago, the Red Army's desperate journey of 6,000 miles. This is their inheritance. For us, it is a familiar image of China. But from the blend of past and present, something new is emerging here. Neither revolution nor China is new to our experience. The Chinese Revolution is.
Recently, owners of 1974 General Motors cars were asked why they needed full-size models. Here's what some of them said.
With our 4-month-old baby and all the things we take along, we really need our full-size car. We really do.
I'm 6'4". I weigh 220 pounds. I'm a full-size man, and I need a full-size car.
I bought this car because it has a good ride and has a good gas mileage, too. I should know because I own this gas station.
I need a full-size car. I do the shopping for 6. I take the children all around. What else would I drive?
I'm a management consultant and find I have a real need for a comfortable full-size car in my client work.
These are just a few of the many excellent reasons why people feel they need a full-size car. You may have your own reasons, so see a GM dealer. It's no secret that there's never been a better time to buy a full-size car than right now. At General Motors, we want you to drive what you like and like what you drive.
Shanghai means on the sea. We do not think of China as a maritime country, but Chinese invented the compass, the watertight compartment, the fore and aft sail, and the stern post rudder. In the 14th century, China was the most technologically advanced country in the world. Proud and complacent, by the 20th century, the Chinese were left far behind the industrialized West. Proud but no longer complacent, the Chinese have been working hard to catch up. Shanghai today has many ancient ways and modern problems, like the traffic jam. The waterway is the city's most heavily used highway. Rivers, more than roads or railroads, crisscross China in every direction, and Shanghai has always been the most important truck stop. Everything moves on the river. There is no energy crisis in Shanghai. Machinery has not yet replaced manpower as the greatest natural resource. Shanghai is building its own trucks and buses and even passenger cars now. But modern transportation has not overtaken the old. They coexist, along with a small fleet of leftover American DeSotos, Fords, and Plymouths, for official use only. If you get run over in the streets, chances are it will be by a bicycle. There are more than 1 million bicycles and bicycle bells. And thousands more attached to carts. China's problem is to move not just Shanghai, but 800 million people from the past to the future. The Chinese can't rush head-on into the 20th century. They have to get there in their own way. Shanghai's primary need was simply to find many people a place to live. Just a generation ago, thousands lived and died in the streets. No one lives in the streets anymore, except to escape the summer heat. There is no escape from the crush of humanity. Today, Chinese are encouraged to postpone marriage at least until age 25, and then to have no more than 2 children. Birth control is now government policy. There are still places here that look and feel centuries old. Where for centuries there was nothing but fields, there is something new, China's first modern suburb. About 1 million people, including several 100,000 young people, have been relocated from the inner city to the suburbs and beyond to the interior. The government is anxious to spread development and industry. It is learning that modernization has its price. That inevitable sign of progress, pollution, is not yet a major problem. But China's planners aren't ignoring it. They can't. There are growing signs of pollution everywhere in Shanghai. For the first time, the city is facing the urban realities that are well known in the West. There were other big city problems that Shanghai inherited from the West and solved. They were declared illegal. One was opium. The opium den was a major commercial enterprise. There were hundreds of them and thousands of addicts. They made millions of dollars for the Shanghai underworld, for foreigner and Chinese alike. Shanghai was a wide open port where fortunes were won and lost, and where anything was available for a price. There were estimated to be between 10 and 25,000 prostitutes. Shanghai roared too during the 1920s and 30s. The dope, the gambling, the prostitutes, all have vanished from the streets and back alleys of Shanghai. It has been reported that crime too has vanished. You don't read or hear about it much, but there is crime and prisons for criminals. The only policemen you see, however, are unarmed traffic cops, whose most dangerous assignment appears to be settling street arguments. What you don't see is the Security Bureau, plainclothesmen who deal with more serious crime. Every city must be governed. Here, the city government is called the Revolutionary Committee. Because this is Shanghai, the committee's importance reaches all the way to Peking. At least 3 of Shanghai's leaders have risen to national leadership, including Wan Hongwen, now ranked behind only Chairman Mao and Premier Zhou Enlai. The Revolutionary Committee's vice chairmen are deputy mayors, who represent the Communist Party, the military, and civilians. Xu Qingxian, 38, is also a member of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. Feng Guochu, 54, is a planner of economic development. Gao Chirong, 60, commands the Shanghai Naval Garrison. For the first time, powerful local officials agreed to answer questions submitted in advance for television. The following film is unprecedented. Chinese leaders, at ease and with candor, discussing Shanghai's past and future.
We have seen many foreign journalists who, after first-hand look at China, find it puzzling. They say they can't understand the Chinese. How can anyone think only of others? Naturally, the Chinese people have hobbies, everyday problems, families, marriage, and, well, make love. But we urge that personal considerations be put last in the order of state, collective, and individuals. The most important task of the Revolutionary Committee is to educate the people. If this is done well, the morality of the society improves. Robbers and thieves still exist, but they are few. Mr. Drasnin has probably been to many cities in the world. Don't you agree Shanghai has the fewest robbers and thieves? But I advise you to take care of your pockets when you're walking on the streets, because in our country, class struggle still exists. There's still a handful of people doing evil deeds. But I can guarantee this, that our youth do not take drugs, not one. The younger generation does not know about this. I've asked my children twice, what is opium? What is a prostitute? They said, I don't know. I think it's better to let them know. Vice Chairman Xu just said that the foremost thing is education. Some Westerners constantly call this brainwashing. Actually, it means that the people should understand ideology. Our material progress is the result of our ideological work. We have made tremendous material progress, but our country is still a developing country. Shanghai is also developing. We are backward in many respects, so we must continue to work hard. The people of Shanghai are just like the people of the rest of China. The old belief is that the more children you have, the luckier you are. According to the teaching of Chairman Mao, the growth of population should also be planned. But it's not very easy, especially when those who have daughters want to have a son. This cannot be compulsory. We have to educate them to act voluntarily. The representatives of the army participate in the work of the Revolutionary Committee. We have a saying that when the army and the people are one, who in the world can match them? We can also better organize the people to prepare against war. For example, we are digging bomb shelters everywhere. As you can see on the streets, according to the teaching of Chairman Mao, we have been digging deep holes for defense since the 1969 incident on our northern border with Russia. It has always been defensive in nature. In case anyone begins to attack us, we think that the workers, the militia, and the army of Shanghai, all joining forces, will be more than strong enough to defend the city. The whole people is an army. We would not invade others, but if they invade us, we're not easily bullied.
These TV cameramen rate the color on RCA XL100 color TVs.
Color and picture quality are the two most important things. The XL100 has it all.
In the XL100, the colors are what they should be. The reds are red, the greens are green, and the blues are blue.
I love the color. The color is very, very good, very clear, and holds from channel to channel.
Over 50% more senior TV cameramen own RCA than any other color TV.
The color in the XL100 is excellent.
An attic bedroom up under the eaves, with a place for the one thing that will make her new house a home. You made every board by hand. Isn't it nice to know that the people who moved it understand what a familiar little house can mean in a strange new one? Allied Van Lines. We move families, not just furniture.
Holding hands. Holding hands. The more you like to hold hands, the more you'll like Touch of Sweden, the hand holder's hand lotion. It's rich in soft, silky moisturizers that make your hands really soft. And yet, Touch of Sweden doesn't leave your hands sticky. And it's a lot nicer to hold hands when they aren't sticky. Touch of Sweden, the hand holder's hand lotion.
Judge, your weakness for chili is showing.
And so's my acid indigestion, Tilda.
That's a case I can help solve with these.
Phillips tablets? What about...
Phillips tablets. They're concentrated. See? Smaller and stronger because they neutralize 25% more acid than the leading roll-type tablet.
25%, eh? That's a strong case.
Fast-acting, too. Get them right next door. Tell them Tilda the teller told you to get Phillips tablets.
25% stronger.
CBS Reports Shanghai continues with producer-reporter Irv Drasnin.
Think of New York or Los Angeles organized into 10 districts. Each district into 10 street organizations. Each with another 10 lane committees. Each with its own 80 or 90 residence groups. Think of a city where housing is crowded but cheap. The average rent less than $4 a month. Where medical care and education are virtually free. Where there is no unemployment and no income tax. There are no two-car garages either. There are no privately owned cars. And there are no washing machines or freezers or television sets in any of these homes. There are no mortgages or credit cards. And it's true, there is almost no dirt. That roughly is Shanghai today. And this is the way the day begins in this lane or neighborhood at dawn every Thursday morning. The word has come down from district committee to street committee to lane committee to residence group to carry out this summer's public health campaign. It is a group activity, and conformity to the group is an old Chinese idea, going back at least 2,500 years. In a word, Chinese life is organized. By custom and by circumstance, the Chinese is a conservative, an organization man and woman. In a country of mass organizations, the neighborhood is the smallest in Shanghai. More than 3,000 families live here, including the Wu family of number 9, alley 74. Grandmother Wu has lived here practically all her life. Her day begins early. By sunup, she is at the neighborhood market that is already crowded with some of the thousands of people who shop here every day. There is no self-service, no sales, no advertising, no frozen food, and no inflation. Food costs the same everywhere in Shanghai, and almost the same throughout China. Pork costs 50 cents a pound. Fish about 15 cents a piece. Like wages, prices are fixed by the government, and they have been stable for 20 years. Getting fed is a preoccupation in a country where eating is a national pastime, cooking an art, and starvation a recent memory. This is Shanghai's inner city, where the Wus were one of 5 families to whom we were introduced. Civilizations differ in many ways, but they all come together in the family. 3 generations of the Wu family live here. Son-in-law Fan Di-shun, age 35. His son, age 4. And his wife, one of the Wu's 5 children. They share one room. Grandfather Wu is 70. He is retired on a pension of $20 a month. He has something that is rare in Shanghai, a room to himself. Like 2/3 of the homes in the lane, there is no bathroom or indoor plumbing, except for a cold water tap. Public toilet and bath facilities are nearby. Privacy is one luxury the Chinese still cannot afford. By 7 o'clock, everyone in the house is up, including 2 other grandsons whose parents work in other cities. Their breakfast is typical Shanghai: sweet dumplings, porridge, and what can best be described as the Chinese version of a donut. Food, housing, security. From generation to generation, the family had to solve these basic problems for itself. The government has taken over these problems now. It wants the family mobilized to work on a 20th century problem: modernization. Since the Russians, the last of the foreigners, left in 1960, the Chinese have been determined to go it alone if necessary, whether as a nation or as a neighborhood. That means to increase production, everyone who can works. Grandmother Wu is taking her grandson to a nursery. As in most families, both his parents work. The lane operates its own small factories, owned by the neighborhood, not by the state. Formerly unskilled housewives now make money for themselves and for local improvements. At the toy workshop, it is tank week. Next week, it might be trucks or chickens that lay eggs. In Shanghai today, almost everyone works. Everyone studies. Marx, Lenin, and the thought of Mao Zedong. The Lane Committee is on Chapter 2 of the Communist Manifesto by Marx. These housewives are the local leadership concerned with questions of housing, sanitation, birth control, and petty crime. But there are study groups for everyone. In recent years, the study group has become a nationwide seminar in ideology. What dominates every meeting in Shanghai is the rhetoric of revolution.
Chairman Mao and the Wounded Soldier.
Ideology is translated into English now and broadcast 4 times a day on Shanghai radio. 250,000 people in Shanghai are learning English this way. These are workers in a food store. Today's lesson, the Chinese say, is a true story.
Suddenly, the soldier opened his eyes and cried out,
Chairman Mao, Chairman Mao, oh, how I wish to see you before I die.
This language program started 2 years ago. Each chapter is designed to increase vocabulary and political consciousness.
The soldiers were so excited that they could talk of nothing else for days after this visit. One of them expressed their common feelings when he said,
Chairman Mao shows deep concern for us all. We'll never forget the day when Chairman Mao came to see us.
We don't know how well the individual Chinese is learning these ideological lessons. If we did, it would be one way to measure the success of the revolution. Another, simpler measure is to follow the second and third generations of the Wu family on their day off. We can't say for sure what they're thinking, but beyond the organization, the work, and the rhetoric, there is a different mood in Shanghai on a summer afternoon. Intimacy can only be captured with a long lens, accompanied by 1,000 cicadas. Today's pastimes might seem tame to a foreigner who remembers Shanghai's past. Gambling is illegal now, but Shanghai poker is still one of the biggest games in town. It is played with 2 decks, jokers high, and with great emphasis. Private life is public. In the hot, humid summer, the street becomes the living room. There is no air conditioning for homes. If there is friction between neighbors or between the people and the government, we did not find it here or in our conversation with the Wu's daughter and her husband. Do either of you ever dream of having a home of your own?
We like living here with my father and mother. Without my parents, it would be very inconvenient. Of course, things are very good now. Our son is in a nursery. We don't have to be so restricted. For instance, we can go to meetings at work, even if it's called on short notice. We can concentrate on work without worrying or go to a movie at night, the 2 of us if we want.
All parents everywhere have hopes and dreams for their children. What hopes and dreams do you have for your son?
We do have hopes for him. I wish he could become an actor, because I myself worked in the field of literature and art, so it might influence him.
Now he's very fond of movies and plays. When he was smaller, I asked him, and he said he wanted to be a soldier. He's very healthy. He can also be an athlete. When he's grown, I hope he can do what the country needs as well as what he likes.
The grandfather, a retired cook, cooks for the family now. The small living room also serves as family room, study, dining room, and as an extension to a small kitchen. The family pools its income, about $90 a month, a third of which is spent on food. There is electricity, but no gas. Cooking is done on 2 coal stoves, which are also their only heat in winter. Ecology is not an issue in Shanghai. Nothing is wasted, not even a drop of peanut oil, which along with rice and cotton cloth is rationed. Our impression in Shanghai was of abundance, not shortages. There is extra food tonight. Another of the Wu's married daughters and her son are coming for dinner. Traditionally in China, the family came first, the individual second. The country was always a poor third. Today, the government says, country first, the family second. There has never been much room for individual choice. Not 2,000 years ago, not now. An individual can't move or change jobs without permission, or read whatever he chooses. Now, at least, he can do things he's never been able to do before. A man can retire. A woman can have a place in the community. A child can get an education. The Chinese believe in planning, but if there are limits to freedom, there are also limits to planning. 800 million people cannot be forced to be of one mind. The revolution depends on pressure and persuasion, and in the end, on the participation of the people.
Should you junk your present auto insurance? Are your claims settled quickly with courteous personal service? Are you paying good money for the wrong coverage? You better find out. See your independent insurance agent. He's on your side. He'll select a policy from a number of insurance companies. That way, you'll get just the protection you need at a fair cost. Get this free booklet from your professional, independent insurance agent wherever you see this symbol.
What do people in Atlanta think of the American Express card?
The American Express card is a ticket to the city of Atlanta.
I would carry just the American Express card if I were going to carry only one card.
The American Express card has more prestige than some of the other credit cards.
When my husband is away, I depend on it in place of him.
And the American Express card is the one that best fits the bill.
Call 800-528-8000 to apply for an American Express card.
The Chinese Revolution is not American, French, or Russian. It works in different ways that seem obscure to us. That has been especially true for the past 10 years, since the start of the Cultural Revolution. Its recent revival has included attacks on everyone from Confucius to Beethoven to Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Talking about revolution and seeing ballet may seem strange to us, but to the Chinese, it's not. In the 19th century European form, there were ideological dangers that were another target of the Cultural Revolution. As Mao saw it, the bourgeois artistry of Swan Lake could only appeal to a new elite he believed had lost touch with the people and with the revolution. On stage, Mao has transformed the arts as he would like to transform society. The man looking on is Lin Yang, one of the choreographers of the Chinese revolutionary ballet, The White-Haired Girl.
Our ballet reflects the militant life of the Chinese people and molds heroic images of the workers, peasants, and soldiers. To carry out this work, we transform classic ballet so that it truly represents a new artistic product of the people. There's the solo, used mainly to express a very false, very haughty style. We repudiated this kind of individualism. For instance, when the landlord abducts the white-haired girl, her fiancé, a young poor peasant, can't contain his feeling for the class enemy. He takes an axe and rushes at the enemy to fight. A solo is used here. He rushes. Takes the axe to fight the enemy. This solo describes his deep hatred for the enemy and his unlimited love for the people. This gives contemporary ballet its own militant role.
It has been called a cultural revolution because it surfaced as a literary debate in the pages of a Shanghai newspaper. This paper printed a drama review in 1965, criticizing a play about an emperor who lived 400 years ago. In the often veiled and allegorical way of Chinese politics, the play had been an attack on Mao Zedong. Mao's counterattack had to be printed in Shanghai. In Peking, he had lost control of the party machinery. The Cultural Revolution was not strictly cultural. It wasn't a struggle for power alone. It wasn't a civil war. Mostly, it was a war of words over the very nature of Chinese communism and its foreign and domestic policies, waged on the walls of China's cities. One issue was the use of material incentives to solve economic problems. In free markets, private land for peasants and bonuses for workers, Mao saw China being led toward capitalism. All of China's leaders spoke in the name of Mao Zedong, but they were saying different things. The leadership was divided. In a most extraordinary political act, Mao launched an attack on his own party establishment. It was as if an American president had bypassed his party, his cabinet, and Congress, and gone directly to the people, led by millions of students, the Red Guards. We heard the worst. Schools closed, industry disrupted, officials denounced, sporadic violence. We've heard about the Cultural Revolution, but never from any Chinese who experienced it. Many of them, it turns out, were as confused as we were.
In the beginning, the thought of the Cultural Revolution was a bit frightening. Such a great movement. How do I deal with it by myself? I was afraid, like having a wolf in front of me and a tiger behind me. So great a movement. Which side do I join? Which side?
Swen Lianjung was a factory worker who now heads the political section of the Shanghai diesel engine plant.
At our factory, families were divided into two factions. Fathers and sons were divided into two factions. Sometimes good friends were divided into two factions. It was hard to avoid some injuries in the violence brought about by a political revolution of so large a proportion. In our factory, 300 people were injured. In the fighting, we used bricks, fists, then sticks, then iron bars, which were the most ever used. In the fighting, one comrade was killed.
In many instances, it took the army to restore order. The Chinese share our uneasiness about the military's role and our tradition of civilian control. Recently, there has been a major shift to regional military commanders. But the army has proved loyal to Mao Zedong and indispensable, and it too was changed by the Cultural Revolution. For one thing, insignias of rank have been abolished. You can tell an officer, we were told, by his political consciousness and by the 4 pockets on his uniform. Ordinary soldiers have only 2. Another thing, the army has been more prominent in Chinese life. It now has a place in revolutionary committees everywhere and in the classroom. One of the biggest and still unsettled questions in China today is who should be educated. The old way was to educate the sons and daughters of civil servants, the traditional elite. The Chinese seem to have turned their backs on history, to educate a new class of workers, peasants, and soldiers. Of all the issues of the Cultural Revolution, this is the most urgent, to find and train successors to Mao's vision of the revolution. Fudan University, Shanghai's biggest, was closed for 3 years by the Cultural Revolution. Its enrollment is still down by more than half. These are some of the chosen few who have passed the test of the Cultural Revolution.
Where were you during the Cultural Revolution?
During the Cultural Revolution, I was in a middle school. At that time, I was a Red Guard, you know.
You were a Red Guard?
Red Guard. And took part in the, yes.
Because during the Cultural Revolution, we are all studying in the middle school, so we all joined Red Guard.
What do you study at the university?
I want to study technology. Afterwards, I was informed to study English, so I'm glad.
You're glad to be studying English?
Yes.
Because English is a weapon. A weapon.
In the struggle of life.
In the struggle of life.
What Marx said.
What do you want to do after you graduate from the university?
I want to be a teacher. As you know, the teacher is very important because teacher will train successors.
Do you plan to marry? Do you want to get married?
Yes, I'd like.
You would like?
After graduate, you know, now we are very young. After graduate, we reach the age we would like.
You would like to be married?
Yes, after we reach the age we would like.
Would you like to have children?
Yes.
How many?
Only one.
Only one?
Yes.
And you?
But now I don't want to think of this because now I study in the university. I only think of how to study well for the revolution. I don't want to think of this.
You don't think about the future?
Sometimes I think, but most of the time I don't think.
Mr. Liu, let me ask you a question. Did you participate in the discussions and the debates here during the Cultural Revolution?
At first, no, I was quite conservative. You see, teachers were not so advanced, and as the students, I was a bit conservative. Later on, I find it is highly necessary to start the Cultural Revolution. Well, I think that one of the problems that now we have solved is, what's your aim in work, and what's your aim in life? Well, actually, before the Cultural Revolution, I was very worried about my personal gain. When I could not get famous, I was worried. So actually, I was not very happy because I did not achieve my aim. But, after the Cultural Revolution, well, I think, my aim in life has been correct. That is, well, I must serve the people and serve the community. Now I take the greatest happiness to teach the students. When I see the students make progress, I feel very happy. So this, I think is quite a great change taking place in myself.
Virtually no one in Shanghai has been left untouched by the bitter debate over how to interpret the thought of Mao Zedong. The Cultural Revolution has changed many people's lives. Sung Yu Ying is a peasant. She is the first one from her village to attend a university. Wu Shui Yun was a teacher. Now she is a factory worker. Fan Di Shun, her husband, was a playwright. Now he is an administrator in a sewing machine factory. Swen Lien Zhong worked on an assembly line. Now he is in charge of political affairs for his factory. Xu Qingxian was director of the Shanghai Writers Union. Now he is a deputy mayor and a member of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party.
CBS Reports Shanghai will continue.
On January 13th, Ford reported the results of a Ford LTD fuel economy test. Now, General Environments Corporation has filed a report on Ford small cars. I'm Hugh Downs, and recently 3 Ford small cars with standard engines and transmissions broken in the equivalent of 6,000 miles were driven from Phoenix to Los Angeles, never exceeding 50. This Pinto averaged 28.1 miles per gallon. This Maverick, 26.7. And this Mustang, too, I drove 28.3. Of course, mileage depends on driving conditions, total weight, optional equipment, maintenance, and personal driving habits, and you may not get the same results. But most small cars offer good mileage. So it's probably more important to know who has the most small car experience, who offers service, and the features and options that suit your needs. And to that point, Ford has made more small cars than General Motors, Volkswagen, Toyota, or anybody else in the world.
Your local Ford dealer is Small Car Headquarters.
This, too, is Shanghai, and much closer to the lives of most Chinese. The dawn of the rice harvest is still the most important day on the Chinese calendar. There are 199 suburban communes in Shanghai, supplying the city with 3,000 tons of food a day. China's fundamental needs are inherited from a simpler age. 8 of every 10 Chinese work to produce food. Mao himself is a peasant, with a peasant's love of the land and distrust of city life. The Chinese Revolution was won in the countryside. Shanghai was everything the revolution was against: imperialism, inequality, poverty, the control of the many by the few. The Chinese needed Shanghai, but they also needed to change it. More important to Mao than the speed of change or economic development is preserving the ideals of revolution. Mao wants to change not only how people live, but how they think and act. It is a revolution vast and experimental. There is no 5-year plan for the modernization of man. History shows that sooner or later, every revolution turns conservative. The Cultural Revolution is Mao's monumental attempt to stop that from happening in China. For the moment, he has succeeded. But this is China, which for 1,000 years has absorbed shock after shock, from Mongols to Manchus, from imperialism to communism. Communism is changing China, but China is also changing communism. The largest state in the world never changes its state of mind completely. We have seen a fragment for a moment, and that moment may already be gone.
Oh, Sonny, after all these years, I find out you really love me. You made me put on the safety belt.
Oh.
Now, if you could only get a job.
You know, Edwin, if you loved me, you'd show me. Oh, Edwin.
Knee pad, shoulder pad, helmet. Good.
Safety belt?
Janet, would you wear my safety belt?
Oh, Henry.
Safety belts. When you think about it, it's a nice way to say I love you. Brought to you by the National Safety Council.
There's no business like show business unless it happens to be news business. 60 Minutes takes a look at the techniques some local news programs use to attract audiences. Sunday at 6, 5 Central on CBS.
I'm Joseph Benty, and this is KNXT's Newsroom. We'll be meeting some people whose nerves were as frayed as ours tonight, thanks to 3 earthquakes. In several places, the operative condition tonight is bundling up and driving carefully. In San Francisco, Mayor Alioto tonight declared a state of emergency. A congressman says he thinks the president will resign by June. American women have a good reason for recalling the past today. Pearl Bailey and Richard M. Nixon break in their new act at the White House. And Bill Applegate takes a spin on a really fast track. Those stories and all the night's news right after the station break.
Here's another outstanding value during National Hardware Week at Montgomery Ward. Weld or braze, cut or harden, heat or solder. Ward's Powercraft 230-amp welder handles them all. Handles them efficiently, too, because Ward's Powercraft welder features variable selection from 20 to 230 amps, plus an increased duty cycle for really professional results. Ward's Powercraft welder, just $109.88. Save over 25% during National Hardware Week at Montgomery Ward.
When you get a coffee brewer from Sparklets for your office, you can forget about black coffee and all the mess of making it. Because with a Sparklets coffee brewer, you just empty a pre-measured coffee packet into a throwaway paper filter. Then place the filter in the coffee brewer and add water. And in about 3 minutes, you get coffee that's as delicious as any you'd get in the finest restaurant. With a coffee brewer from Sparklets Water Company, the coffee in your office won't be blah anymore.
Here's another outstanding value from Ward's.
Say, Ward's is having a drapery sale.
Oh, what kind of sale?
A drapery sale. 25% off every drapery at Montgomery Ward.
Every drapery?
Every drapery. Ready-made, made to measure, even custom fabrics. Pick a color, choose a pattern. Ward's has hundreds.
And styles?
You name it. Every drapery Ward sells. Now, 25% off. Use Ward's convenient credit.
KNXT Channel 2.
Good evening. Sylmar tonight was the center of one of 3 earthquakes that shook the Los Angeles area. There was little or no damage from the quake that registered 4.5 on the Richter scale. It struck just before 6 o'clock, although telephone service was disrupted in Newhall, the center of the 1971 quake. The 2 other quakes were relatively minor jolts, the first one at about 6:27 and then another one at about 9, just as our Bill Applegate was out asking people what they thought of the latest reminders of our unsteady underpinnings.
During the 1971 earthquake, we lived in Sylmar, right between the 2 hospitals. And it was the most terrifying experience we have ever had, and there were injuries in our family. It was an experience that I think is very, very hard to forget. And when you think you've forgotten, the slightest rumble reminds you again, and you remember.
Where were you this afternoon when...
Well, to be truthful with you, I was in the church.
In church?
Yeah.
How strong did you feel it?
Well, it just sounded like bad rumbling in the roof on the top of the church. Sounded like somebody may have dropped a bunch of rocks.
Well, is it possible that the reason you don't worry too much about earthquakes is because you were in church?
Well, I guess it was a real good place to be.
I was trying to make a phone call, and all of a sudden the coffee table started shaking. Phone fell off the coffee table. Then my roommate came out and said she fell off her bed.
Of course, Mother Nature is doing other things to remind us of the variety of living in Southern California. The storm that was raining on us snowed on most of us and made us cold. That's on its way out now. In fact, it looks as though we're going to have a beautiful weekend. The snow caused almost all of Interstate 5 along the ridge route to be closed most of this morning. Snow crews now have finished clearing the road in both directions. 1 to 2 feet of new snow fell in the area between last night and tonight. Most of the snowing has now stopped, and Bakersfield, which hadn't seen any real snow in about 5 years, got a brief look at the real thing this morning. About 3 inches, which melted away quickly. We'll have a full weather report, of course, later in our broadcast. All that cutting down on appliances and electricity use in Los Angeles by most of the residents, which began a few months ago, apparently has helped ease the power problem, so much so that the city's energy coordinator, Harold Williams, is proposing that about 60% of the city's residences be exempted from power cutbacks, at least those with penalties. However, at a news conference with Mayor Bradley, Williams insisted that even if the Arabs lift their oil embargo, Los Angeles residents must continue to conserve electricity.
Of the program we're talking about, there is no reason to be concerned about rolling blackouts. There's no reason to be concerned about any unemployment being caused by it.